I can show you the precession in another way, which is, in fact, very intriguing. Suppose I have here a string, a rope, like we have there. And I stick into that rope, I attach to the rope this wheel, just like so. And I let it go. Well, we all know it will happen. Clunk. It's clear. All right. But now I'm going to spin it before I let it go. So here at the bottom, at this point P, there's a loop. And here is the axis of rotation of the bicycle wheel, which is solid brass. It's a solid piece. And I give that a length, a little r, not to be confused with capital R, which is the radius of the bicycle wheel. So this is capital R. And it can rotate about this here reasonably freely. I call that center point Q. And let this be the part of the wheel that is on your side. I try to make you see it a little bit three-dimensionally. Suppose now I give it a spin in this direction, omega s. S stands for spin. In what direction is now the spin angular momentum? Use your hands, your thumbs. Spinning in this direction, yeah. It's spinning in this direction, angular momentum is in this direction. That's a spin angular momentum. L spin. Well, there is a force on this system, mg, and that force is in this direction. It has a mass m, the bicycle wheel, and it has a radius capital R, and this part is little r. So relative to point P, there is a torque. And the torque is R times mg. This is 90 degrees. So the cross product is nice. The sine of that angle is 1. So the torque relative to point P is R times m times g. In what direction is that torque? R cross F. In what direction is that torque? Use your hands, thumbs, whatever you want. You think in this direction? I disagree. I disagree. R cross F is, you must be kidding, in the blackboard. It's not out of the blackboard, it's in the blackboard. R cross F is in the blackboard. There is a torque in this direction. Nature, gravity, provides that torque. What will the spin angular momentum do? It's going to move in the direction of the torque. It's going to chase the torque. So what will it do if the angular momentum is here? What will it do? It will do this. And as it moves, the torque will always be perpendicular to the plane, to the string, and R. You can just see that for yourself, why that is. At this very moment, when the angular momentum is like this, the torque is in the blackboard, because it's R cross F. But when I'm here, this R has changed position and always remains perpendicular to the wheel. So the torque will also change direction. And so this angular momentum, spin angular momentum, will keep chasing the torque and starts to rotate freely. That is exactly what I was doing when I was sitting on the stool, except that I had to apply that torque in my hands like this. It's exactly the same direction. I had to apply it all the time, and when I stopped, the precession stopped. Here, however, the torque will never stop, because this mg will always be there. And I will show that to you shortly. You may say, you must be crazy, because you're violating Newton's second law, F equals ma. This object got to fall. There's only one force on that object. F equals ma. How can it not? The center of mass must fall with acceleration g. Aha. There is not just one force on that object. What do you think is here? The tension in this cable, T, will be exactly mg. And so the net, the sum of all forces on that object is 0. There is no net force on that wheel, but there is a net torque. And that's why it's going to precess. If there had been a net force, then indeed it would also go down if this force were larger than this. So nature is very clever, the way that it deals with these rather difficult problems. Before I will show you this demonstration by spinning this wheel and then hanging it there in that rope, I want to mention that the angular frequency of the precession, which should never be confused with the angular frequency of spinning, is derived for you, it's only a 3 or 4 minute job, on page 344 in your book. And I will not derive it here, but what comes out of it, that it is the torque, which is the one that we have here in this case, divided by the spin angular momentum. That gives you the frequency of the precession. In our case, for our bicycle wheel, it is RMG, and the spin angular momentum of this wheel, if it is rotating with angular velocity omega of s, would be I times omega. Remember, L is I times omega of a spinning wheel. So I have here I rotating about point Q. This is the axis of rotation, times omega of the spin. This is the spin, and this is the precession. And then the period of precession would be 2 pi divided by omega precession. Let's take a look at that equation and see whether that sort of intuitively makes sense. First of all, if you increase the torque, the upstairs, then it says that the precession frequency will increase. That makes sense to me, because the torque is persuading the angular momentum to follow it. So the torque is persuading the spin angular momentum to change. Well, if the torque is stronger, then it is more powerful, so you expect that the precession frequency will be higher. However, if the spin angular momentum is very powerful, then the spin angular momentum says, sorry, torque, I'm not going to go as fast as you want me to go. So when you increase that spin angular momentum in the wheel, it is also intuitive that the precession frequency will go down. As the wheel spins, it has spin angular momentum, but as it precesses around like this, there will also be angular momentum in this direction, because it's rotating like this. Therefore, there is a total angular momentum, which is the vectorial sum of the two. This equation will only hold as long as the spin angular momentum is really dominating the total angular momentum. And you can see that immediately, because suppose you made the spin angular momentum 0, that it is not spinning at all. Do you really think that the precession frequency will be infinitely high? Of course not. So this only holds in situations where the spin angular momentum is way, way larger than the angular momentum that you get due to the precession. So there are restrictions. When the wheel comes to a halt, when it's no longer rotating, you better believe it, then the thing will go clunk. There's no longer the precession mode. For our bicycle wheel, to get a feeling for how long the precession will take, we can substitute the numbers in there. Our bicycle wheel, the rod, the brass rod, little r, has a length of 17 centimeters. And the radius of the bicycle wheel is about 29 centimeters. And let me make the assumption that all the mass of the bicycle wheel is at the circumference, which is not very accurate, but it's close to that. I mean, there are some spokes here, but let's assume that everything is here, so then the moment of inertia is mr squared. Well, if now you take a frequency of 5 hertz, spin frequency, you can calculate now omega of the spin frequency. Omega equals 2 pi times the spin frequency. And so I know now, I can substitute that in there. So I get that omega precession now equals rmg times the moment of inertia. I assume that all the mass is at the circumference. It's an approximation, so we get mr squared, and then we get omega s, which we have here. We lose the m, and so we get rg divided by omega s times r squared. That is the angular frequency of the precession, and the period of the precession is 2 pi divided by omega, and you find then for the period of the precession about 10 seconds. So if I gave it a spin frequency of 5 hertz, with these dimensions and with this approximation that all the mass is at the circumference, you would expect that it would precess around very gently in about 10 seconds. But I have very little control over that frequency. So it is possible that I give it 7 hertz, it's possible I gave it 3 hertz. But I will do what I can. I'll actually give it the maximum one that I can. That is always guaranteed success. Where's the wheel? The wheel is here. So we'll spin it up, and then we'll put it in here. Notice the way I'm spinning it. I'm holding it away from you now. I'm going to change it and do it differently next. And there it goes. About 10 seconds. Isn't that amazing? And it rotates seen from below clockwise. Now it's going this way, and I'm going to redo the experiment, changing the direction of rotation, and then it will go the other way around. And now the angular momentum, is it rotating like this, is pointing here. Spin angular momentum is pointing like this. Torque is like this. And so the spin angular momentum is chasing that torque. I'm the spin angular momentum, I'm the torque. This is the torque. It's chasing it. All right, so I had this in my right hand. That's all right. And now I will, so when I spin it up, that's right. So let me now change the direction. I'm turning it over. And now I'm going to spin it up again. Angular momentum is now in this direction. See, it's turning the other way around. Angular momentum is in this direction. Torque is now towards me. Angular momentum is chasing the torque. I've changed the direction of the spin angular momentum. I've not changed the direction of the torque, and now it is rotating as seen from below counterclockwise. Before it was rotating clockwise. If I can increase the torque by putting some weight here on the axle, here I have this actually extends in our case, and I can put some weight on here, then I actually add to the torque, and then you will see that it goes faster. The precession frequency goes up. So I will put some weight on there. Oh. So let it first go around, which was roughly 10 seconds, what we calculated. And now I'm going to put 2 kilograms here at the end. And then you will see an instantaneous increase in the precession frequency. You see, it goes much faster now. I take it off, and then it goes back to its roughly 10 seconds. So what I have done is, I have increased its torque, but not at the expense of m. Because the reason why the m cancels is because the moment of inertia has an m in it. But if I just hang this object on it, that doesn't change the moment of inertia of the spinning wheel. None of this is intuitive. None of this is intuitive.